Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 9 of my review of the Whispers of the Old Gods cards. And I think, in fact, there are 9 cards in this review. A ton of new cards have been released recently, so settle in. We've got a lot of nifty cards to take a closer look at today. Starting off with the 5-mana mage card, the Cabalist Tome. This is a spell, of course, and not only that, but it adds 3 random mage spells to your hand as well. So you might be thinking about comparing this card to other mage cards. For instance, Arcane Intellect is a 3-mana card that draws 2 spells. You could even kind of start to think about this card as a Sprint from Rogues, which is the 7-mana draw 4 cards. So this falls somewhere in the middle there, both in the number of cards you draw and the mana cost. But there are a couple important distinctions about this card. First off, you're not drawing cards from your deck. You're drawing random cards, just coming out of the other and being added to your hand. So that has its advantages and disadvantages, right? Cards you draw from your deck, typically you chose them for a reason, so they have synergies with other cards in your deck. You know they're going to be reliable and consistent. So the predictability and the synergy resources of cards in your deck are often very advantageous to the kind of deck you're playing. Whereas random spells, of course, there's variance. They can be great. You could get 3 fireballs. The guy has 18 health, and you just kill him over a couple turns. But you could also get 3 arcane blasts playing a freeze mage, and they're not even playing minions, right? So there's so much variance that 3 random spells is an issue. There's also the side effect that these aren't coming from your deck, which means you're extending the depth of your deck by essentially 2 cards, because Cabalist Tome is 1 card, but you're getting 2 additional cards that didn't take up a spot in your deck. So in really long, drawn-out fatigue-style battles, this card will give you more resources than a normal card would provide. And there are mage decks that are designed to last that long and play into fatigue, so in those kind of matchups, this card could certainly see a lot of play. It's not necessarily too slow, because with 5 mana in the late game, you still have 5 mana left over to use these spells, and you might even be able to cast 2 of the 3 spells that you draw, but almost certainly one of them will be castable. So I definitely see some upside and some potential in this card. It's probably not necessarily a tempo mage card, although it could be, just because the mana cost is a little high, and it'd be hard to do a lot of stuff in your turn. But there are so many different ways to play mage, and plus the meta is totally unknown right now for Whispers of the Old Gods. So I think this card has the pieces necessary to be a pretty solid addition to any deck. That said, it is an epic card, so it will be expensive to craft and a little bit restrictive for budget players. So I don't see them taking to it too kindly. Moving on to the next card. This time it's a Paladin card, and it's a 1-mana minion called the Vilefin Inquisitor. Pretty cool artwork. This is a Murloc, and it's a 1-mana 1/3. And 1-mana 1/3 is a pretty standard body size for Murloc. Well, not just Murloc cards, but for 1-mana cards in general, but also a handful of Murloc cards as well. And apparently Blizzard really wants to make Murloc Paladin a thing, with cards like Murloc Knight, and of course the big Murloc Paladin combo finisher that they so love to use. There's a lot of new Murloc synergies. That said, I don't think that Vilefin Inquisitor will fit into a Murloc anything can happen combo deck. I do think it's more of a mid-range or aggressive style Paladin card, because this battle cry, we haven't even mentioned it yet. Your hero power becomes summon a 1/1 Murloc. So essentially any Murloc that doesn't have charge or buff is bad for the 1-turn kill damage combo, but it's great for just consistent, reliable Murloc synergy, which is another thing that Murloc Knight as a card does so very well. So by the time you have Vilefin Inquisitor, your new hero power that's summoning a lot of 1/1 Murlocs, a couple war leaders, you got your Murloc Knight, you got your old Merc guy, you got a really solid, almost zoo-style board presence-oriented deck. When you combine that with cards like Blessing of King or Blessing of Mites to target the right Murlocs to keep them alive or enhance your buff synergies, I can see a pretty neat little deck coming together. And Vilefin Inquisitor just ensures that you always have some sort of Murloc synergy available. There's always a new Murloc to summon. which is great when Murlocs are all about their internal synergy. So I can see this card seeing a lot of play. Frankly, even just as a 1-mana 1/3, sometimes that's not a bad thing to have. So I'm intrigued by Venthyr Inquisitor, and I think it's actually one of the potentially strongest cards we've seen in the set so far, despite being just a 1-mana Murloc. But we'll have to see how those decks take shape and if any other Murloc cards do get added to Paladin in the meantime. Moving on to a new Shaman card, the 6-mana Thing from Below. This is a 5/5 minion, has Taunt, and it costs 1 less for each totem that you've summoned this game. So this card is pretty crazy. I want to break it down in a few different ways. It's a 6-mana 5/5. A lot of great 6-mana cards are 5/5s. Solanas and Berthorison, so on and so forth. And it has Taunt. It does have a little bit of an effect. So I would argue this card isn't terrible at 6 mana. Certainly it's not the best 6 mana card in the game, but it's not terrible. It's actually probably playable sometimes just as a 6 mana card. But the effect here means that it's almost never going to cost 6 mana. Totem Shaman is this close to being a good deck anyway, I feel like. There's just a couple pieces missing for a good Totem Shaman deck. And that means that every time you summon a totem, the word is summon, not play. So that means your hero power counts. Any cards that summon a totem themselves count. So I think Tuskar Totemic would count towards Thing from Below's cost reduction. All that means that this is chopping off 1 mana every time. So I can see scenarios by the time you hit turn 4, you can probably play this guy as a 4-mana 5/5 with Taunt. There's also going to be scenarios where on turn 8, turn 9, turn 15, this could theoretically be free. So you top deck a free 5/5 with Taunt, which in the late game, I don't need to tell you, can make a huge impact on your board presence. And since it has Taunt, it can protect other high-value resources that you've placed onto the board. If you get a nice card draw style Totem Shaman deck that's able to pump out resources and refill their hand, Thing from Below could just be that perfect 0-mana top deck that seals the deal and wins you the game. So I think it's good on curve because sometimes it'll be that 4-mana 5/5. It's good in the late game. It's got flexibility. Taunt is vital to include in most decks, at least 1 or 2 of. I like Thing from Below a lot. I'm not sure everybody else loves it so much. I think they might be underrating it a little bit. But Shaman seems to be getting a mid-range to control style helping of cards with Whispers of the Old Gods, and this is a pretty fantastic one in my mind. But it's not the last one. There's actually another one. So moving on to the next card is the Master of Evolution. This is a 4-mana 4/5, another Shaman minion. This time the battle cry is transform a friendly minion into a random one that costs 1 more. So first off, I'd just like to say a 4-mana 4/5 is good. That's the stat allocation you want. Most good 4-mana cards, even class cards that have a powerful effect, are 4-mana 3/5s. So 4-mana 4/5 is a nice little bonus. It's a Chillwind Yeti with a powerful effect, and I actually think Master of Evolution's effect is incredibly good. So transform a friendly minion into a random one that costs 1 more. We've only seen one other card with a similar effect so far, and that's Recombobulator, which transformed a minion into a minion with the same cost. So you could attack with a minion, transform it, it might get healed, it might transform into something with charge that can attack again. It's famously used with giants, so if you have like a Molten Giant and you transform it, you might get another Molten Giant with full health, so on and so forth. But this is Recombobulator with a bonus, and that the new minion actually is more expensive. So I would say in Shaman, you're very good at keeping stuff on the board. Tokens, totems, all that little stuff tends to survive and cling to the board. So Master of Evolution, typically on turn 4 or in the late game, is going to have something to transform. Particularly your hero power totems seem like the most likely target. Now those cost 2 mana to summon, but they're actually only 1 mana cards. So when you do transform a totem, it will become a 2-mana card. So you could take your healing totem and turn it into a knife juggler, for instance. I don't think anybody would hate that change, and that's what makes Master of Evolution so good, is that you can still get value. Like a turn 6 hero power Master of Evolution, you're creating a 2-drop along with your 4-drop. So I see a lot of ways this card can be used. It's great for Shaman, particularly just because they're so good at keeping that board full. And again, I think this could be a staple mid-range Shaman card. I'd love to see it in action. So let's move on. Actually, another Shaman card. I don't know what happened to Blizzard, but they finally decided to give Shaman some love, because they're getting cards that are not only good, but have cool artwork and pretty neat effects. The next of which is Hammer of Twilight. This famously looks like Cho'Gall's hammer to me. This is a 5-mana weapon. It's a 4-attack weapon with 2 durability. So similar weapon might be Death's Bite, right? It's a 4-mana, 4/2. You've also got True Silver's Champion, which is a 4-mana, 4/2. Those both have positive effects. Hammer of Twilight has an even better effect, and it only costs 1 mana more. So those are both staple weapons in their class, and for good reason, because they're fantastic cards. And I think following that line of thinking, Hammer of Twilight will also be a fantastic card for Shamans. The 5-mana cost is not particularly more prohibitive than a 4-mana cost in most scenarios. And the Death Rattle here is actually pretty nifty. Summon a 4/2 elemental. So not only are you getting a really nice 4/2 weapon, but you're also getting a 4/2 minion for free, which would arguably cost 3 mana, perhaps 2.5 mana if you really did the math. So a lot of value is packed into this card. It's almost like a reverse Tyrion Forge Ring, but cut in half, right? So you get minions, you get weapons. There's all kinds of cool stuff in Hammer of Twilight. Plus, you actually, most of the time, will get to control when that Death Rattle happens. So even though a 4/2 minion seems susceptible to removal or cheap, efficient trades from your opponent, you might be able to play a taunt before you seal the deal and summon the elemental, or at a time when they don't have a lot of cards or removal left. So there are ways to play around the safety of that elemental as well. And this is also kind of like Harrison Jones or Acidic Swamp Ooze defense, right? Even if they destroy your weapon, they suddenly have to deal with an extra minion coming out sooner as well. So that's pretty neat too. I just think Hammer of Twilight's a high-value, interesting card, and in the right kinds of decks, certainly not every deck, but in the right kinds of decks, it will see play. So let's move on. Up next is Ravaging Ghoul. This is a 3-mana warrior card, has 3/3 in stats, and a battle cry: deal 1 damage to all other minions. So warrior might be losing Death's Bite in standard format, but they're getting some nifty whirlwind effects to replace it, of which Ravaging Ghoul is certainly a good one. Note that this says all other minions, so when you play this, it won't be a 3/2. It will still remain a 3/3 when it's played. And a 3/3 for 3 is fine as far as stat allocations are concerned. 3/4 is the dream, of course, but 3/3 is reasonable for the cost, particularly when the battle cry is this strong. You don't need to know. Warriors have a ton of different ways to take advantage of whirlwind effects. So I could see like Coin Acolyte into Ravaging Ghoul on turn 3 to draw a card. Of course, it's great with Grim Patron or Frothing Berserker. So many different synergies. Really simple card, but cool artwork, great design, functional for the class. Will most definitely see play. I don't see any reason this card doesn't get played. It's got defensive, offensive, and utility flexibility options. So all around, ideal card for the warrior class. Moving on to a druid card. This one is Myer Keeper. You get another keeper for druids. But this time it's a 4-mana card. And it's got 3/3 in stats. And a choose 1 effect. You can either summon a 2/2 slime when you play this, or you can gain an empty mana crystal. So another great druid card with choose 1 options that are both fantastic and can really make a card strong depending upon the state of the game in which it's played. So for instance, Myer Keeper on turn 2 with an Innervate. You might just want a 3/3 on turn 2 and that empty mana crystal. So in other words, a 3/3 with Wild Growth attached. So that means you're basically paying 2 mana for the Wild Growth and 2 mana for the 3/3, both of which are very efficient, particularly on turn 2 when a 3/3 is suitable. But if you play this on turn 10, you may not need the extra mana crystal. So instead, you might need the 2/2 body. So you're getting 5/5 in stats for 4 mana, split across 2 bodies, which is also very good. So depending on the scenario, the game state, the board state, Myer Keeper is valuable in both decision paths. And it, to me, feels like a fantastic card. I don't know that this will fit necessarily into every Druid deck. We don't know what Druid's going to look like. There's big rumors that the combo is leaving. So ramp-style Druids with big minions might become more popular. Myer Keeper would fit in that world. He might fit a little less in a combo-oriented Druid world just because he's not responsive to the board, whereas a Keeper of the Grove is able to do stuff immediately to the board while still depositing a solid body for 4 mana. So it probably just depends on the meta and the state of Druid whether this card becomes really popular, but it has all the necessary pieces to be a good card. It's fundamentally sound and strong. So I hope Myer Keeper sees play. I love Druid, and I'd like to play this card. It looks like a lot of fun. Moving on to one of the craziest cards Hearthstone has ever seen. The artwork alone speaks volumes about how cool this card is. I love that giant tongue and those crazy teeth. The 9 mana Blood of the Ancient One. This is a 9 mana 9/9, so it's like a super giant. And if you control 2 of these, at the end of your turn, merge them into the Ancient One. Now you might be wondering what the Ancient One is. Well, this is the Ancient One. A 30/30 minion. That is absurd. By far the largest minion without buffs or shenanigans that Hearthstone has ever seen. So this is like if you can install like summoning Thaddeus, but on steroids, right? It's 2 9/9s turning into a 30/30. Of course, if you get the 30/30, this card is outstanding, right? You'll probably just win the game with 1 attack. The problem, of course, is that in reality, that's an 18 mana investment because each of these cards cost 9 mana. There are ways to suss cards out of your deck and play them for free. I know, and there will be combos and decks designed to do exactly that. So it will be possible. Ancient One will be played eventually. It will get to attack. But there's a fundamental flaw with cards like the Ancient One and these really big combo turns where you have to work so hard to make this crazy thing happen. It's that the Ancient One is stopped by a Goldshire Footman. The 1 mana 1/2 taunt stops the Ancient One in his tracks. So a lot of the times when you make these big plays and build decks designed to do this, your opponent just has some really cheap and efficient way to disrupt your plans and ruin everything that you've built. So often it won't pay off. A 9 mana 9/9 also is just very slow on its own. So you're basically giving your opponent a couple turns to find resources. They're going to know what's up most of the time and dig everything they can out to deal with it. So as fun and as cool as Blood of the Ancient One is as a card, I think it's very unlikely we ever see a really competitive, successful deck designed to utilize these cards. I think they'll just be gimmicks and highlight reels. And unless there's some new card coming we haven't seen yet that has a very reliable and consistent way to pull cards out of your deck, get them into play, stealth them, and do all this crazy stuff, I think Blood of the Ancient One will be relegated to the sidelines, which is awfully sad because I'd love to see the Ancient One show up on my board from time to time. So let's move on to the final card of this particular review. It is another 3 mana warrior card. This time it's a spell called Blood Warriors, and you can add a copy of each damaged friendly minion to your hand. So you might be familiar with the mage card Echo of Medivh. That just it's a 4 mana spell that adds all the minions you currently have in play to your hand. And that's a card that has seen play in a variety of different decks. You can do some pretty crazy stuff if you're able to get a bunch of Sludge Belchers or a couple Archmage Antonitises or some Doomsayers and all these crazy things you can do with Echo of Medivh. This is a card in a similar vein, but this time it does have a caveat. The minions have to be damaged in order for them to be copied. Now that sounds like a difficult caveat, but I really don't think it is in Warrior. You still got Whirlwind, you've got stuff like the new Ravaging Ghoul. There are a handful of different ways to damage everything. And I can see late game control style Warriors with decks designed for a combo turn where you have a Sylvanas on the board, you got a Grom, you got stuff that happened to stay alive. You're going to be able to copy those super high value legendary minions. Now, some people will say, okay, you got one or two, we got one extra Sylvanas and one extra Armor Smith, who cares? Well, for a 3-mana investment, getting a couple extra cards, particularly really strong ones, in late game fatigue, drawn out battles, to me can go a really long way. So I think in most Control Warrior games, there will be a turn where you're like, I got 3 good minions on the board, I have a Whirlwind effect, I have Blood Warriors, I can refill my hand with these solid minions, can do something impactful with the Whirlwind, and suddenly I've got resources to stretch the game out and to do more than my opponent for longer. So a lot of people don't think this card is going to see play, but I actually disagree. I think it's a great card draw effect that's within your control and can set up some pretty crazy plays and really extend your resources and the depth of your deck as a warrior, which is a class that's typically designed to draw games into fatigue. So I think Blood Warriors is going to be pretty good. We'll have to wait and see. I think at least one might find its way into most standard control style warrior decks, and there will be fatigue warrior decks designed around this card with 2 of them. So I'm going to be playing with this, I know, seeing if I can make it work, because I think it's got tons of potential. Not everyone agrees. So that'll do it for my part 9 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. That was Blood Warriors, Blood of the Ancient One, Myer Keeper, Ravaging Ghoul, Hammer of Twilight, Master of Evolution, Thing from Below, Vilefin Inquisitor, and the Cabalist's Tome. All in all, I think a pretty good set of cards, one of the strongest sets I've reviewed so far, so I'm really looking forward to seeing these. If you have any questions or comments, please do offer up some discussion in the comments below. I always appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.